Arguments.
So psyched. I was just talking to my husband about it. I know. You're like, wow. So psyched.
It's controversial, as. Yeah, but I was thinking.
You know what? Yeah. So I was at a reception at the White House last year, and that you saw on TV absolutely did not do it justice.
Yep. False start. 5 yards. Yeah. Okay. So I'll call the meeting to order. 7 o'clock. Tonight we're doing something a little different in that we are acting as a local board of health tonight to hear proposed health order for the Bevins property. So I'll open the hearing, and the hearing has been called to consider the issuance of a health order against Donald Bevins, 3173 St. George Road, per the recommendation of Town Health Officer Cindy Thurston. Mr. Bevins was served a notice of intent to issue a health order on Friday, October 4th by Sergeant Scott Graham of the Williston Police Department. A copy of the notice has been provided to us as the Board of Health prior to this hearing. So I'll ask Cindy Thurston, our health officer, to come to the table with a microphone, and I'll swear you in before you present your evidence. So if you'd raise your right hand, do you swear or affirm that the evidence you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? You have a seat, and proceed to show or give us the evidence in support of the health order.
Okay, thank you. I will start with the notice of intent to seek the health order, which I believe you all have in your packets, to list the evidence that I'd like to present in reference to the health order. On July 27th, 2018, I visited the property at the request of Williston Police Chief Patrick Foley due to a complaint of bed bugs. I observed and documented the following violations: lack of installed smoke and carbon monoxide detectors, lack of a fire extinguisher, lack of screens for all operable windows, bed bugs and cockroaches throughout the residence, and tenants living in 4 campers in the backyard without appropriate sewage facilities, heat, or water. In your packet is my rental inspection report dated July 27th, 2018. Then on July 30th, 2018, I sent a letter to Donald Bevins at the above address seeking voluntary compliance with the State Rental Housing Health Code. And again, that letter is attached to your notice. I made referrals to the Department of Environmental Conservation and to the State Fire Marshal. A copy of the Fire Marshal inspection results dated August 7th, 2018 is attached. On September 19th, 2018, I sent a letter to Mr. Bevins instructing him to provide and maintain a porta potty for the tenants residing in the campers and to provide 6 gallons of clean drinking water per day to the tenants. I informed him that if he did not voluntarily comply, an emergency health order would be issued. A copy of that letter is attached on this notice. A porta potty was placed in the backyard on September 21st. However, it was removed on February 19th due to lack of payment by Mr. Bevins. I issued an emergency health order on October 1st, instructing Mr. Bevins to provide a porta potty, bottled water, and either money for heat or gas for the generators for the tenants living in the campers. A copy of the emergency health order is attached to the notice. Mr. Bevins complied with the order. I visited the property again on January 23rd and observed the porta potty was inaccessible because it was obstructed by snow. Smoke detectors were removed, cockroaches and rodent feces were evident throughout the lower and upper floors of the residence. I sent Mr. Bevins a letter outlining these and other issues on January 26th, and a copy of that letter is attached. I believe in your packet you also have the Fire Marshal report from January 29th. A violation was issued by the Town of Williston Zoning Administrator Matt Bullinger on February 22nd, 2019. The violation required residential occupancy to cease in all campers on the property and required all rental of rooms and apartments in the house on the property to cease. The violation was appealed to the Williston Developmental Review Board by Mr. Bevins on April 23rd and was upheld. The town is presently in the midst of a lawsuit to gain zoning compliance. A copy of the DRB minutes upholding the violation is attached to this notice. I visited the property on February 27th and observed no porta potty in place. A letter was sent to Mr. Bevins on March 17th, of which you have a copy. I visited the property on September 13th, 2019. I observed that there were still 2 tenants living in a camper on the property. They are using water from Mr. Bevins' tap, supplying their own source of heat and electricity with a generator, and have no sewage hookup. There was no porta potty. The home showed evidence of cockroaches and other bugs. I also observed some operable windows in the house still without screens. Another referral was made to the Fire Marshal. The State Fire Marshal revisited the property on September 23rd. A copy of their report is included with your packet. The report states smoke alarms are still missing from the property and compliance was required by September 30th. On visits to the property, I observed tenants living in the first floor of the residence in rooms without smoke or carbon monoxide detectors and without adequate means of egress. The State Fire Marshal indicated in his September 23rd report that the first floor bedrooms are now empty. The State Fire Marshal conducted a follow-up visit to the property on September 30th and verbally relayed to me that the smoke alarms still need to be installed and the bug infestation on the property continues. Based on this investigation, I have determined that this situation creates a public health risk to the neighborhood and the local water supply due to lack of sewage facilities for the tenants in the backyard camper. Health risks also exist for tenants in the house due to bed bugs, lack of fire extinguishers, lack of adequate smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, lack of screens for operable windows, and lack of proper heat and electrical facilities. And then I would refer you to the draft of the public health order based on that evidence. I would request that it be ordered that Mr. Bevins would need to install smoke and carbon monoxide detectors on each level and near each bedroom of the house within 48 hours. He would mount fire extinguishers on each floor of the house within 48 hours. He would professionally exterminate the entire house within 30 days and alert myself as to when the work is scheduled and the contractor that will be used before the extermination takes place. That the tenant residing in the camper on the property will need to move out within 7 days. The camper is uninhabitable due to inadequate electricity and heat and lack of waste pipes. And finally, that all operable windows in the house will be fitted with screens within 30 days.
Thank you, Cindy. So if the board has any questions at this time regarding any of the evidence that's been presented, this is your time.
Cindy, one question I'm on page 1. First of all, what a thorough report, thank you. I'm on page 1, item number 3, it says I may refer to the Department of Environmental Conservation. Do you know which division?
I apologize, I don't,
Okay.
and I have not been able to get a copy of their report, but
Okay.
just the number they give to us as health officers for referral.
Okay. Okay, good, thank you. And the other question I have is, I'm on the public health order, the part that talks about conclusion of law. And I guess my bottom line question is, when you make those citations there, I'm not sure exactly what the citations are. And then the other question I have is, were there are there town ordinances that were also violated that have a human health, risk or impact?
I am not familiar with town ordinances that might apply. The legal descriptions on the right of that conclusion of law are referenced in our rental housing code.
Okay, so I should go look there to find
Right,
out
and
more
I can-
information about those.
Right, and that
Okay.
is also referenced in the inspection report included with your
Okay.
packet.
Any further questions from the board? If not, then is Mr. Bevins or any representative of Mr. Bevins here tonight?
Not that I know of.
Had you had contact with him? Do you know if he was planning on coming? Or?
I have not spoken with him since our last home visit, so I don't know.
He was given a copy of the notice of intent to seek a health order, and in that order, or in the document, it lists the time and the place of the hearing, which is tonight at 7 o'clock. And he received a copy of the notice of intent to seek a health order. Any further questions from the board? And since Mr. Bevins is not here, are there any others in the audience who wish to make any statement regarding the information that's been given by our health officer? And seeing none, then a motion to close the hearing is in order at this time.
I'd move to close the hearing.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion?
Just to verify, Mr. Bevins did not indicate he could not be here tonight. He just hasn't communicated at all.
I have not heard from him since our last home visit.
Also looking to Eric or Rick. Okay.
Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. So now we're at the point where we can deliberate either in private or we can deliberate in public. If you have no objections to deliberation in public, we can go ahead and do that right now.
No objection.
Hearing no objections, then we will deliberate on whether or not a health order should be issued.
I don't see how you can't issue one.
The evidence, I don't know if that's the correct word here, seems quite compelling.
I would agree, yeah. It's not like this is the first time, apparently. I mean, we've been trying to work with them. The town has been trying to work with them for some time now and just has not had a response. So, all right. Yep.
So, is now a good time to talk about the,
The draft of the
yes.
yes.
Cindy, I guess this question is probably best posed to you, but it's not meant only for you to answer, or others can certainly chime in. Under finding of facts, it says the sewage from the camper compromises the entire neighborhood as well as the local water supply. Where I wonder if that number 3 should really focus on the sewage from the campers that's not a good word, is a public health risk. So I wonder if number 3 should be modified, and you state it quite well, under number 14 in the notice of intent. So I wonder if we should just take language from there and use it in number 3. And then the only other, and this is on the nitpicking side, is I'm under order, under number 4, the sentence that reads, "The camper is uninhabitable due to inadequate electric and heat and lack of waste pipes." I think that's an accurate statement, but I don't see that as part of the order. You kind of well established that, or it has been, I believe, well established previously. Do we want to include
You
that?
want to state that in the order because you're saying he has to be removed within 7 days, and the reason being it's uninhabitable.
Okay. So,
I also-
so I'm looking at the people who do this like every day, and they think it's a good idea to have that there. I will, I will certainly,
I also don't agree to the changing of the language that you
Yeah.
proposed for the other one,
Yeah.
sorry.
yeah.
So it would appear in the large paragraph at the beginning that Mr. Bevins did not appear at the hearing, so that would be one of the things that would be
Okay, yeah.
clarified in the draft.
Yes. Thank you, good, yeah.
Any other recommendations for issuing a health order?
No, but procedurally, how do we do it? I mean, the findings of fact are obviously made by us as the health board. You had a suggestion. You didn't agree with it. Do we need to make a motion to adopt the findings of fact with your edit?
Sure.
I'm not sure about the motion this is actually required.
Okay.
Normally, the board, after deliberation, will be presented with a draft document, and then your signing is the actual order itself.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But obviously, if you want changes to the draft order, then we're gonna wanna know what those changes are, so when we present you with the draft, you're
Right.
ready to sign.
I
Jeff,
guess my only thing was I didn't feel that we had somebody who had definitively said, I don't disagree with you that it is a health risk, that I don't disagree with, but there wasn't somebody who specifically with the authority stated that. That's why I wasn't saying to leave the language alone as opposed to changing it, that.
And I get your point, and so we can maybe modify the language slightly to say something along like likely poses, or, there's good reason to believe it does, or it would pose.
But findings of fact don't usually state it that way.
But I'm going to, under Cindy's notice of intent, under number 14, where I believe, Cindy, you are making a finding that it creates a public health risk.
Yes.
It made me
And,
happy.
and usually when, sorry, I'm gonna reveal a little bit the world in which I work in. When domestic sewage, humans are exposed to it, that is usually kind of a de facto poses a potential, health risk.
That's fine, I'm fine.
So which number of the findings of fact are we?
He wants number 3.
What,
Three. Number three.
Number
In
3
Cindy's-
changed, it says that it is, in fact.
in Cindy's notice of intent, I'm looking at number 14, but the one I think should be changed is number 3 under findings of fact.
What would you have it say?
It says, "The sewage from the camper compromises the entire neighborhood as well as the local water supply."
What do you want it to say instead?
Creates a public health risk.
And then I think you can say, "and compromises the entire neighborhood as well as the local water supply."
That's fine.
That's fine.
So you just want an addition to the language?
I think we need, and I'm using as an example, way back when, we worked with a community that was having problems with their septic system. And again, it was our determination that that posed a public health risk that I think gave the select board the, what would be the right word? The justification for choosing, the option, which was to let them connect to the town system. I feel the same here. This is part of what gives us the justification, is this finding.
So the sewage from the camper compromises the entire neighborhood as well as the local water supply and constitutes a public health risk.
Those are good words. That's a good phrase.
Right.
Rick, am I seeing a look of concern?
No, I'm thinking process. This is something we are
Okay.
change and print off before you guys leave tonight.
I was gonna say, how long a delay would this be if we do that and you can't get that done?
I think we can.
Yeah, and
Okay.
we only need the chair to sign the actual order. So once these are set, I can, some point in the meeting, I'll just make the edits downstairs and bring up a copy to execute tonight.
So I think we could probably have a motion that would issue the public health order with the suggestions that we heard tonight.
And actually, just notice the health order should be signed by Terrence McCaig as chair of the Board of Health, not the Select Board.
Yes.
It says Select Board.
Okay.
As long as we're being picky.
Take a look at it,
Do all the way.
Is the motion in order?
The motion is in order.
I'd move to approve the proposed order with amendments thereto.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you, Cindy. I think we're.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate all your hard work.
That was a lot of work.
So, we can move on then to the minutes of October 1st, 2019. Is there a motion?
I'd move to approve the minutes of October 1, 2019 with amendments thereto.
Second.
Page 1. Page 2.
Minor thing on page 2, item number 5, last sentence, Randy Bean's last name is spelled wrong. It was spelled correctly in the others present, but not there.
Say it again.
Randy B.
Oh, okay.
His name is spelled wrong.
Maybe a notation in it that his suggested clarification was adopted, or was,
Yes,
Yep.
I had that noted also. Anything else on page 2? Page 3. Hearing no other corrections, all those in favor of approving the minutes of October 1, 2019 as amended, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. So it's time for public comment. If anyone has anything to speak on regarding anything on the agenda or not. This is your opportunity. Seeing no hands raised, we'll move on then to the noise control ordinance amendment. And Eric, I think, are you going to talk to the change in language?
Yep, I'm prepared to speak to that. So in the board's packet is a further draft proposal for the noise ordinance amendment as a result of discussion after the October, actually it was the October 1st meeting, it was back in, yeah, it was in October. The last meeting that we discussed this issue. Most specifically, item D, working in the language for the 3-year rolling average, not to exceed 20 events in a particular calendar year. Introduce this to the board tonight for further discussion, and if the board is ready to warn a public hearing on the matter.
Any questions from the board?
I think you nailed the wording down.
Is there any comments from the audience? Bob?
Shoot, I started something.
No, the good news is we're down to the point of being nitpicky and
Yeah. Good point.
not
Yep.
working on the overall issues. In D, having looked at the wording there, I know we reference the number of 16 as average over a 3-year rolling period as that portion continues on. I wondered if it would provide any further clarification to start that sentence with the number of special events shall not exceed an average of 16 per calendar year, and then with the description of how that's formulated as a 3-year rolling average, whether that adds anything or not. I think all of us who are in the room and have been part of this discussion are pretty well on the same page that that's what we're driving at. But for somebody 5-10 years who's looking at this who may not have been privy to all the discussion and intent, whether that would provide any clarification. That was the only thing I had on that particular section. The only other that I had in section E there was, and I'm sure this is just something that I missed in previous revisions, but I think when we started having the discussions about the non-Hunter Ed special events and the allowance of those to be on weekdays and things like that, I think we may have forgotten to pull that stipulation out of the Hunter Ed events. So as this is written and was presented for this meeting, still stipulates that those would be held on Saturdays. I think the majority will. I think Art is probably on his way. He runs most of our Hunter Ed events. We're a little bit ahead of schedule. I didn't have a chance to follow up with him on whether he felt that Saturdays only for the Hunter Ed events would be any kind of a hindrance or limitation to those. But those were the only two, again, nitpicky things. I don't know if that was just an oversight on my part to miss that the Hunter Ed events were still stipulated as Saturdays while that stipulation had been removed from the others. But those are the only two things. I don't think either of those operationally changes what we're trying to do here, again, just for the purpose of clarity.
So, Bob, on going to number 16, if the language was changed to the number of special events shall not exceed an average of 16 per calendar year as averaged over A, and the rest of it remains?
Yep.
That would be.
Yep.
I don't object to the adding the additional an average of to the beginning of the sentence. Yeah, I don't think that changes the impact.
I also don't object to taking out the maybe run on Saturdays. I just would say maybe run, provided the course is certified by the Vermont Fish and Wildlife.
Yeah, I had played around with that. I just changed, I had thought about the wording of 4 hunter safety courses per calendar year may be held. Not married. I'm not married to the word held.
Are those typically held on a weekday at times, or?
We did have one of the 4, or one of the 3 to this point, where Hunter Ed may try to squeeze another one in before the end of October. We're still in discussion with them on that. If that one does occur, that'll be a Saturday. But up to this point, 2 of the 3 have been Saturdays. One was a Friday, though. I don't remember the details around whether that was the appropriate scheduling for that one, but one of those was held on a Friday. And that was all the clarification that I had come up with regarding the proposed draft.
So the suggested change in C and E, again, is to do what?
Shall not exceed an average of 16.
I got that in D.
Oh, DE,
The E is the 100 safety courses.
instead of run on Saturdays,
Be
it
held.
would be maybe held, comma, provided the course.
Maybe held, okay. Okay. Anyone have any objections to the change in that wording?
I do not.
No objection from me.
So if we are in agreement with the proposed wording changes, a motion to hold a public hearing would probably need to address the changes that are recommended in the wording as well.
How about this? I'd move to warn a public hearing on the proposed amendments with the additional wording changes made on October 15, 2019 to the noise control ordinance.
Is there a second?
Second.
I think a gentleman just entered the room who, see, the person you were looking for, Bob?
Not who I was looking for, but they're here with us, but
For moral
that's,
support, okay. Is there any discussion then on the motion?
I mean, if we're gonna remove that stipulation, I think it's, if there was any passion around keeping that in there, I would defer to Art on whether he felt like that was a limitation, but if we're gonna pull that and have the flexibility to hold those hunter ed events on days other than Saturdays, I think, I don't see the need for further consultation with our side.
All right. Any further discussion on the motion? If not, all those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you very much. We finally done it. We'll be having a public hearing on this, however, the next step, so stay tuned.
Haven't gotten rid of us yet, right?
Thank you. So we're running ahead of schedule. We can't have the public hearing on the bylaws amendment until 8 o'clock. So let's go down to item number, let's try item number 9, the federal opioid class action lawsuit. And Eric, you have given us some more information on this.
Yep, I can update the board on that item now, just get my notes. So just to start out, I'll recap the discussion from the October 1st meeting. The board held a preliminary discussion on 2 federal lawsuits concerning opioids and their effect on communities. The first is a class action suit, which all municipalities in the country have been named as parties to, and the town has the ability to opt out of that suit by November 22nd. The second that we discussed is for the town to consider filing its own lawsuit against the actors in the opioid supply chain, manufacturers, distributors, retailers, and pharmacy benefit managers. The town of Bennington was the first community in Vermont to take this type of lawsuit. So the board has a memo in its packet I prepared to follow up on some specific questions raised last meeting. One question was in regards to compensation and cost for any attorneys litigating this on behalf of the town, if the town were to pursue its own lawsuit. The attorneys that Bennington's working with, I reached out to them. They told me it would be on a fully contingent basis, and only if there was recovery in the lawsuit would the attorneys receive compensation, according to the information they provided to me. The other question was the burden of discovery that may come up in a lawsuit of this nature. I've included the wording from the email from that attorney in my memo, but just a summary of it is there would be mindful of staff time for that, and they would feel it would be a narrow or minimal impact in that regard. Also, at the VLCT Town Fair a couple weeks ago, these attorneys were there, and also a local attorney by the name of Alexander Collins, who's kind of serving as a liaison, and he's offered if the board wanted to discuss this further, if it gets to that point, he'd be willing to come to a meeting and answer questions about this litigation Bennington's entered into, if the board were interested in that opportunity. You also have included in your packet a communication for the board from the town attorney, Fletcher. I ran both of these by him, along with the additional questions the board had to get his feedback. That's available to the board at this point, just the board. So there's a few paths forward, kind of outline them here. If the board was to do nothing, the town would remain in the class action lawsuit that has that November deadline to opt out of. The board could opt out of that lawsuit, and I'd recommend a motion for that. I've included a draft motion with this memo. The board could opt out of the class action suit, and the town could file its own lawsuit, like Bennington did, or could remain in the class action lawsuit and file its own lawsuit. So I know probably a lot of different possible pathways here, but just it's the update on the information from last meeting, and look to the board for direction if any further information is warranted here.
So, questions or comments regarding the issue?
I actually really am curious to see what Ted has to say, just being the litigator of the group. I can't tell you why, but my gut reaction is I want to opt out, and I don't know why I have it.
First of all, I don't do class actions.
Well, that's not helping me very much.
Not a lot of, two-person law firm doesn't get a lot of call for class action lawsuit litigation. Crazy, but true. My instinct tells me that we should do nothing and stay in the class action that's already going on. The reason I think that is that I still am not sure about the I guess I'll call it the Bennington suit. I don't know how much more benefit we would get by joining that lawsuit, but I saw that there was a letter back saying that the law firm would do everything it could to make sure that town resources and town administrative time would not be impacted. That's easy to say, but I don't know that it's true, and I don't know. I'm not saying it's a deliberate falsehood, but I mean it's easy to say. So I think my instinct is to stay in the class action. As with a lot of class actions, you don't know anything's going on, and then all of a sudden you get a letter saying it's been settled, and usually people get like $2 or something. But this would be apparently more. It'd be measured at least in a couple $1,000 or something. But that's I think the easiest course of action for us to do, and is to do nothing and just stay in the class action. Then if we get some money, it's found money. We didn't have to do anything for it. If we went the Bennington way, then I'm not sure we would have a lot of, I'm not sure that we would have a zero administrative impact on the town, which would be something I'd absolutely want to have, is a zero administrative impact. And I certainly in no way, shape, or form think that we should file our own lawsuit against opiate manufacturers, because that'd be crazy. That's my thoughts.
Any further comments or questions?
Well said.
So if we're not opting out, then we don't need to do anything. And if we're not going to join with Bennington, we don't need to do anything either, I believe.
To paraphrase Harry Truman, a select board's job is to say yes and no, but mostly no.
Rick or Eric, do you have any thoughts, or?
I agree with what Ted said.
Yeah.
My concern is if we join in with Bennington, there is going to be an impact on staff to show the damages that we're experiencing as a result, and that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do.
Yeah, okay.
I think it would be difficult to do.
There are there, I mean, but it's not as easily quantifiable.
Sure. But that's one of the problems with the opiate crisis, is that it affects so many different levels of things, and then to go into court and say, this is how much more in police overtime it cost us, And the response back, well, how do you know that officer wouldn't have had to have responded to that domestic abuse situation anyway? Well, that becomes difficult.
I agree with that,
So if we're all in agreement on this, we can move on to the next subject, I believe. And let's go on to the Clean Water Advisory Committee. Rick, I think you were talking about that.
This is a position that the board fairly recently appointed James Sherrard, and then it was a year ago.
He was reappointed recently.
Yeah,
but
he was
he's-
reappointed recently. So, and then he probably resigned and took his stuff to probably. And since then, we've been fortunate to find a great replacement, Christine Doherty, and we'd like to have her appointed in the position that was vacated by James Sherrard.
Any questions for Rick?
The only one, and obviously I have no objection whatsoever, did she realize that she was gonna be doing this when she? Okay.
Then the motion also is in order.
I'd move to appoint Christine Doherty as the town's representative to the Clean Water Advisory Committee to an unexpired 2-year term through June 30th, 2021.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, well, let's go to the North Williston Road traffic calming update. And Eric, I think you're doing that, and Bruce is here as well?
I will say, Mr. Chair, a resident informed me they were planning to come at 8:15.
They do.
That topic.
Well, we can't do the public hearing until 8. We have nothing much else except the manager's report, which isn't going to take a half an hour, so.
But we have other business too, but that also isn't gonna take half an hour. I guess we can.
Open the floor to town gossip and then you end.
We did receive,
Not that much time.
All right, you want me to do manager report?
I want to, Jake, is he all right?
Jake
Jake
Nathan,
Nathan? Did he-
Oh, yeah, as far as I know.
saw him a week ago.
Whenever I
He was
see the
fine.
resigned post effective immediately, I'm like, "Oh, everything okay?"
Well, let's do manager's report then, before we go to the North Williston Road.
Just a couple items. Excuse me. Joy was just referring to the resignation of planning commission, longtime planning commission member Jake Mathon. His letter of resignation just said he had a host of other things going on, so we decided that something had to give, and this is one of the things. But he had served, as I say in my manager report, 11 years, so he's certainly one of our longtime commission members. Secondly, on a different matter, the police chief has completed the promotional process. As I mentioned, I think at our last meeting, he selected Josh Moore as the next lieutenant, the first lieutenant, actually. And I'm not referring to the rank when I say first. And secondly, to fill the vacated sergeant position, which Josh had served on previously, he has selected Officer Shepard to fill that position as sergeant. The official swearing-in is taking place this coming Friday at 3 p.m., and everyone is welcome to join us. It'll be at the police station, of course. Going in reverse order in my report, Eric was recently selected to serve on the PASIF board, which stands for Property and Casualty Intermunicipal Fund, that's run by the Vermont League of Cities and Towns. There was a number of people that were vying for that position, and so we're proud that Eric was selected. So, and I think that'll be a good position for both Eric and the town, because he will bring all the experience he gains from that position, as well as providing Williston's perspective on that board.
No, thank you.
And then finally, not my written report, next week, I will be, the first half of the week, I'll be attending the International City County Management Association Conference. The international conference that this year is being held in Nashville, Tennessee. The second half of the week, I will be on vacation. So I'll be accepting emails Monday and Tuesday, and not so much Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And I'll, as in the past, I will provide the board with a written report of the conference.
Seeing how it looks like we have some time, what are the highlights of the conference?
I don't know yet. Oh, you mean coming up?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't even had time to look at I mean, I have, but I didn't memorize the speakers that we have. But there's 3 keynote speakers that I'm sure will be interesting, and a couple others, and a host of various programs and the usual various displays of vendors that offer all kinds of interesting things for municipalities, which for the most part are way too high priced for a small town to look at.
Okay.
But when you look on the surface, it sounds, oh, this is great software, and then you look at the price and it's, not so much for the town. But anyway, I mean, last year I did get a lead on one that the program that we currently use for our service request portal. I learned of that last year's conference. So sometimes it does pay to listen to some of the vendors.
How many folks attend?
Boy, it's more than a couple thousand.
Oh, so it's huge.
And it is international. There's people from, as many as 20 different countries sometimes that attend these things. So it's definitely an international conference.
Yeah. And where will you, well, you don't have to tell me where you'll stay, never mind. Nice place you'll stay at?
Medium priced. I never,
Yeah,
I never
set
stay at the
myself up
highest
for that,
price.
didn't I? Yeah.
That's all I have for this evening on my manager's report.
Thank you, Rick.
Getting off the board?
Immediately.
It's
We-
been a long time. That's-
We do, we're advertising, we will be shortly. We do have one person who the board has already interviewed for a position on the planning commission, and was not selected because of multiple candidates.
Yeah.
And that person has expressed an interest in putting her name in the hat once again.
Well, we're going to do the North Williston Road traffic calming update, and Eric, I guess you're doing that.
Sure. So I'll just give a quick background here. Corridor study was completed in 2018 with preferred alternatives adopted by the Select Board for North Williston Road. These were split into phases. Phase 1, installed in 2018, included a radar speed feedback sign, chevron signs, speed-activated curve warning sign, and centerline rumble strips through the hollow, the hilly section on North Williston Road. Phase 2 this year included evaluating a temporary speed table installed just south of Fay Lane. Speed limit is 35 miles per hour in that area. Sure.
I'm concerned that, first of all, there's no formal action that's planned for tonight on this in any event. The letter that we received from the folks, some of the folks on North Williston Road, one of the things that they were making a point about was public input and et cetera. Without saying whether I agree with their position or not, that is their position. And what I'm worried about is if we do go forward, we're well ahead of where we would be. And I know that all times are estimates, but I'm worried that if we go forward with our discussion tonight, that will create friction and difficulty. And since there's no formal action anyway, I'm wondering if this is something that we might want to postpone and put on another meeting.
Later this evening.
I
What's that?
do know
Or later.
one of the authors of the letter told me he planned to attend at 8, to come to the meeting at 8:15 tonight based on the agenda.
And this is the status report, so.
I understand. And we do have a public hearing at 8.
Yep.
Could we adjourn for 10 minutes?
Well,
We could,
I don't
well,
think we've ever done that. That I
We have
recall. You,
We have never,
we can,
you have the other business item.
We do have other business? Oh,
well, we have the public hearing on the bylaw amendment.
maybe a catering permit.
Yes, we do. We have that as well.
We should talk about that for 10 minutes.
Well, I was thinking we can listen to whoever comes at 8:15 after the public hearing is adjourned. And
Yeah.
so if we continue on with the update that we have, that would be good, probably.
Okay. Proceed or?
So we'd go, well, so I think I would like us to adjourn for a little while.
To recess.
And then take this up. The public, I don't think the public meeting, public hearing is.
That will not take long.
I don't see a horde of people.
It'll take longer to explain why we're having the meeting, the public hearing than
As
it
much of a
will.
wedge issue as transportation impact fees are in town, yet there is no one here. But yeah, so I.
We can recess for 10 minutes if you like.
Do the permit, the catering permit.
Well, we can certainly do that.
you've done
So,
the
Rick, we
meeting
do
up 2.5
have,
minutes.
Yeah.
Keep going, we can do this.
We do have a catering permit, and
I'll talk very slowly.
Yes.
Then it's gonna be up to Bruce to tell jokes.
So, we have a catering permit for an event scheduled for October 19th, and it's at Williston Road, 5399 Williston Road, Suite 101, so I'm not quite sure where that is. But anyway, the caterer is Daedalus Wine Group. Daedalus, okay. And it's all gonna be inside, and staff has no objections.
that's it.
Sorry.
Is there a motion regarding the catering permit?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
It's to celebrate the grand opening of a new business, Radiance Beauty Spa. Radiance Beauty Spa.
Hearing no discussion, all those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Is there any other business while we're
An
on other
inquiry,
business?
since we have the time. What's going into the Toys R Us?
REI. Yeah, they're planning some big festivities for their grand opening sometime later this fall.
I think they were talking about opening in late October or November, something like that. Right.
I know they're hiring.
Yes. If there's no other business, then we can recess until 8 o'clock. Okay, so we're out of recess and ready to start the public hearing on the bylaw amendment for transportation impact fees. And I'll read the warning. The Williston Selectboard will hold the public hearing to receive comment on proposed changes to Chapter 45, Transportation Impact Fees, of the existing Williston Unified Development Bylaw pursuant to 24 VSA Sections 44, 42, and the Williston Unified Development Bylaw. Public hearing will take place on Tuesday, October 15th, 2019, at 8 p.m. in the Williston Town Hall Meeting Room located at 7900 Williston Road. So we are in the public hearing. I asked Matt Belanger to tell us a little bit briefly about what the amendment is about, and then we'll go into the public hearing.
Okay. So this proposed amendment to the bylaw, in its largest change, raises the cost of a trip as would be generated by new development in Williston from the current fee of $700 a trip to a new maximum fee of $1,943 a trip. And that's by and large the biggest change that's proposed in all of this. The basis for that fee change is also contained within the amendment. The amendment revises the list of transportation projects on which fee revenue can be spent and adjusts the cost of the fee based on the total cost of those projects. The biggest change in terms of the project list is that the project list has really been narrowed to focus on projects that are primarily the responsibility of the town, so not projects that have large price tags with lots of state money coming in, but rather projects that are not likely to happen unless the town spends this money on these projects. We won't sort of receive them via some sort of VTrans work plan item in the future. So the fee is based on that revised project list. The recommended fee is based on new development paying all of its share of the cost of those new projects, where those new projects across a fee horizon stretching until 2040, construction of the projects on that list would be predicted to maintain congestion levels, or rather service levels of the road system in Williston at the same level it is today. So the amount of vehicle congestion you would experience in Williston today with today's development would be similar in 2040 to the amount of vehicle congestion you would experience then with all of the development that's predicted to happen between now and 2040. Your delay times on Williston's roads would be similar if these projects were built and that predicted development all happened across that horizon. So the fee is based on new development paying all of its quote-unquote fair share of its impacts for a set of projects that would keep things more or less as is in terms of relative time spent and ease of getting around Williston. That's a very short summary of what's happening with the impact fee. There are a few other housekeeping items in the amendment, primarily making sure that the fee language is clear about when a developer or applicant builds part of an impact fee project as part of a larger plan of development, similar to the way that Zephyr Road was built as a component of the Finney Crossing development. The language has been cleaned up a bit to make sure that it's clear that there's significant credit for the dollar amount that that applicant contributes to the construction of that project. And that's an important distinction. You can build an improvement and get credit for it against future development across the horizon of this fee, but what you cannot do is buy a bunch of trips from the town by just sort of writing a check and saying, well, I'd like to buy my trips now before the price goes up. We will accept the construction of infrastructure that everybody gets to benefit from, but not just cash as a hedge against the fee going up in the future. And I can go into more detail on any of those elements or other elements covered in the memo. Following our introductory meeting, I didn't hear any requests for the Planning Commission to look at anything, so what's in front of you at the hearing remains unchanged from what we looked at the informational meeting.
Thanks, Matt. So it would appear that there's no one here in the audience to talk about the bylaw amendment. And once we close the hearing, then the board can ask the questions that they wish to. Since there's no one here, a motion to close the public hearing would be in order.
I move to close the public hearing on proposed amendments to the Williston Unified Development Bylaw.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Just a quick question, we didn't receive any written comments or verbal or anything like that, okay?
All those in favor of the motion to close the hearing, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So now we'll go on to possibly adopting the proposed amendment. And any questions from the board to Matt regarding the issue?
Well, maybe I'll start. Sorry. Matt, I don't know if you remember back to the informational hearing. I'm having some conceptual difficulties with impact fees in general. And kind of the school impact fee is the one that sort of, if you will, tainted my opinion, if that's an okay way to put it. You started to hit on one of my questions or concerns here is, by raising the impact fee now from, $750 to $1943, are we fairly charging people for their transportation-related impact? Kind of a way I was looking at it, and you might have, the way I was looking at it is, a lot of Williston has already been developed, so a lot of the development has already happened, whether it be residential, commercial, industrial, what have you. So the pool of people who will pay for this new infrastructure through the impact fees is a small subset of the folks who, let's just say, located in Williston between now and 2040. Is it true that, how should I think of the folks paying this new impact fee? Should I think of that as it's fair compared to what other people have paid? Or is there a different way to look at it? Does that make sense?
Sure.
I'm struggling with this a bit.
Well, I think the way that I would think through that is in the part of the fee where the fee is intended to maintain the transportation level of service that we have today until the end of the fee horizon in 2040. So everybody today pays for the cost of the development that's already happened in terms of the amount of congestion we all experience on the roads and the amount of challenge we have moving around the town. And so we're all paying today a certain amount of congestion. We've also all paid money to develop infrastructure, but day to day, a lot of that cost is simply the cost incurred in moving around. And
Or lack of, if you will.
or lack of.
Yeah.
And in 2040, all of us who are here now will still pay that same amount of congestion. But we won't, we're already here, we're paying it now, we will continue to pay in time, effort, et cetera, in 2040, the same amount. That new development will also benefit from that same amount of congestion or same level of service, but will pay to keep it that way. So, you go into a room, there's so much capacity, everybody goes in, it gets a little more crowded, and at some point somebody says, hey, I don't think this room ought to get any more crowded. If somebody else comes in, they need to help add on. But not so that everybody has more room, just so it doesn't get any more crowded. So if you think of the roads as having a limited capacity, the system as having a limited capacity, the new development is paying to add just enough capacity that the amount by which it is crowded or congested stays the same.
Okay. When I think back on the school impact fees, I think one of the things that happened there was this anticipation of kids that would be going in, due to development, people moving to Williston that would end up in the schools, but that didn't occur. And it didn't occur to such a large degree, a complete doubling, I think, of Williston Central School that was envisioned, and we're actually, I think, pretty close to pulling the trigger on, actually isn't needed anymore. So my question is you said, it's based on predicted development. Using that as the intro, what if that predicted development doesn't happen?
Well, because the fee is charged per trip, if the predicted development doesn't happen, it won't pay the fee, and we won't have the money to build the projects. And we won't build the projects, and ideally, there's some parity there where we're only building the projects necessary to mitigate the congestion of what does come in. So that, again, we're all kind of still paying that same amount of time and difficulty in moving around.
So in a sense, it's kind of like self-regulating. That may not be the best term, but it's if they don't come, they don't pay, but we also don't need the improvements to maintain a current level of
Right, so,
mobility or something.
right. Now, my understanding of the school impact fee in your example is that there was a school impact fee targeted at the initial construction of the Allenbrook School, and that the fees we took in related to the Allenbrook School were used to pay off the bond for the construction of what did get built. And that when it was determined that the town had paid that bond off, that fee was retired, and that's the drop in my bar chart that I showed you. That's
Right.
that's the big plunge. 2015 to 2016 is when that Allenbrook fee goes away. Similarly, with our roads, if we say it was 2035 and we were really assertive about building all these transportation improvements and we had built all of them, very shortly thereafter, we would say it's time to retire this fee until we do a new study and determine whether there's something else we need to do. If the world suddenly shifted and we were all using a different mode of travel that didn't create as much congestion as our current one does, and we said, we don't need all these projects in order to mitigate congestion from new development anymore, we would be well advised to adjust this. But you cannot charge an impact fee to pay for stuff that you already need. So, we can't say, we'd sure like the room to be bigger, so we all had more room right now. Let's make the new guy pay for it. You really aren't supposed to do that with impact fees. And I think what you're describing is the experience. Is sometimes it feels like that's what's happening because it takes so long to amass the funds and then pay for something, or you're paying for something long after it's been built, but you're still mitigating that new growth. It's hard to build, 1/20th of a school a year for 20 years.
Part of my concern about impact fees, especially when they drastically change, either go up or go down, is it becomes really a question of timing. When is it, I forget what it is that causes you to kick in, an impact fee to kick in, if it's taking out a building permit or, if that's, literally a day on either side of that, when you pull that permit, could greatly impact what it is you end up paying. I wish there was a way in which impact fees could be equally, maybe there have to be a cost of living associated with it or something along those lines, cost of inflation associated with it, but it would be equal. That's not what we have. We have a system where, there are these blocks of times in which there might be a high school impact fee, but low transportation. Then we get to the next block. Well, the school impact fee is gone, but now we're going to come up with a higher transportation impact fee. So it just kind of depends on which block you fall in. And there's just something, I guess, I conceptually struggle with that reality of how impact fees, I guess, need to be assessed.
Right, so the history of the transportation fee is you had a fee of about $300 a trip until 2009, I think, and then a study that justified a $2,300 a trip fee, but willingness to raise it only up to $700. And I guess that's the other part of that story, is that a fee like this one at $1,943 has been justified for a very long time. It's just that the decisions in the past, I think partially in service of what you're saying, which is to raise them gradually, the decision was not to charge the fully justifiable fee at that time. So the recommendation the Planning Commission made this time around was to say, yes, let's recommend charging that fully justifiable fee. You know, maybe it's a little bit like ripping off the Band-Aid at this point, you know, but at least we're not going from 300 to 1,900, we're going from 700 to 1,900. I mean, you know, the headline in the Observer still said town considers tripling impact fees, which is not far from what this is. That's, you know, absolutely true. I think the other thing, in the context of Williston and Williston's plans for growth and how Williston has grown, is that there is a great amount of new, especially commercial development, which would have the greatest impact fee liability, that won't be built unless it's built in concert with some of the projects that come here. So, you know, any new commercial that is benefiting from the grid streets that would need to be built sort of in the big box part of the west side of Taft Corners would likely be part of a greater plan of development that includes something like Trader Lane. And a street that would physically need to be built to serve that development anyway would also provide that developer with significant credit against their impact fee liability. So the town has done a lot of mapping and a lot of planning, and by doing so, you're encouraging parity between the construction of a lot of this infrastructure and the development that would necessitate its addition to the transportation network. So you need that road to access because you're going to build something that generates a lot of traffic, and you need Trader Lane in order to provide access to that piece of land. But lo and behold, that road also provides a broader benefit to the system, and you're going to get credit for that as well.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, do you have, not out of curiosity, hoping you know the answer to this, do you know what, in the models that you're using to predict future growth, what percentage of that growth will be residential versus what percentage will be commercial, business, non-residential?
Some of those predictions are in the report prepared by our consultant. I can't pull them to the top of my head.
Yeah.
The majority of the new trips would come from new commercial development.
I suspected that, yeah, I just was.
Because, you know, one single-family home is expected, actually under the new Urban Land Institute, it used to be 1.01 trips in the PM peak hour, now it's 1.
Okay.
So it's literally 1 for 1.
Yeah.
You know, a unit in a multifamily apartment is less than that. Sometimes it's half a trip, 3/4 of a trip in the PM peak.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can do that, or you can build a small fast food restaurant with a busy dinner hour and you know, generate, for the same amount of square footage as a single family home, you can generate 30 or 40 or more trips in that hour. And that was that example. We looked at what Moe's Southwest Grill paid, and I believe they paid back when it was $300 a trip, and they paid, you know, $30,000. So it's saying nearly 100 trips estimated during that PM peak hour, which is what happens at a fast food restaurant. And so part of the answer to today's question about that fee liability is, well, yeah, if that kind of high volume thing was going to build somewhere and not come in as part of a project that built a piece of this network, it would put additional congestion and strain on the network that would need to be mitigated somewhere. But it's much more likely, because of all the planning Williston's done, that it would show up in the growth center and be part of a project that built one of the necessary streets.
And then the last question, I think this will be it for me, is when the planning commission was coming up with this recommendation, you know, looking at the studies and I assume basically agreeing with them, was there concern about that almost threefold jump in the fee, or was it more, no, this is what it costs, this is what we should charge?
I think the concern about the increase in the fee on the planning commission's part, and you know, they're a group with a diverse set of opinions
Yes.
about this for sure, but it was somewhat mitigated by the understanding that somebody pays somehow. And so either the development will happen and we'll all pay because there will be more congestion. The development will happen and we'll pay because we're keeping up with congestion by building these things out of general fund monies. Or there will be some balance between what the person creating the new trips pays in order to create those trips and what the town kicks in. And, you know, some of the cost estimates for these projects are already getting old. The price of everything is going up all the time. There's a little bit of inflation adjustment worked into this fee study, but the town would still have to spend money beyond these fee revenues to build these projects. I can almost guarantee that, just based on the age of some of the cost estimates that are out there.
Any further questions or comments? A motion to adopt would be in order.
I'd move to adopt amendments to the Williston Unified Planning Bylaws presented.
Second.
Is there any discussion on the motion?
Just real quick, this is a little difficult for me, but I'm going to vote no just because I'm not convinced. But I'm not taking that lightly.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
Nay?
There's no abstentions. So we have passed it. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate all the hard work of the planning commission and yourself.
Let them know, they'll be happy to hear it.
So let's go on into the North Williston Road traffic calming update. And Eric, I think you're going to lead this off.
Yep. We'll start out with just some background, updating the board on North Wilson Road corridor. Corridor study was completed back in 2017 with preferred alternatives adopted by the select board at the time. Phase one of those improvements were installed in 2018. These included radar, speed feedback sign, chevron signs, speed activated curve warning sign, and centerline Fay Lane for about 6 weeks in late summer. It was taken out in early September. So tonight's update is going to take a look at the speed data, kind of look at any possible next steps discussion, just kind of continuing our dialogue on this. So I looked at some speed data. So I'll start out and say the common measure of traffic speed analysis is the 85th percentile. That means the speed at or below which 85% of all vehicles are observed to travel. The Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission collected data during its corridor study in July of 2017. They collect data using those black tubes in the roadway. Everyone's probably driven over them at one time or another. They're, you may or may not know they're there when you go over them. So this data showed that the 85th percentile in the area just south of Fay Lane was 47 miles per hour in 2017 when that was collected. So the speed radar feedback sign was installed in September 2018. And this is, it's pretty neat setup that this, in addition to letting a driver know their speed leading up to the sign, it also captures that data. So the police department downloads this and prepares a report for us every few months. We look at it on a quarterly basis. I think they download it every month or so. And so what I looked at, and included in your packet is a larger version of this. So it pulls data, it looks at the 85th percentile speed, then it can also show the percent of cars that slowed down when they were approaching this feedback sign, the quantity of vehicles that traveled over 10 miles per hour and 20 miles per hour, then that is a percentage. So what I did is I looked at this data from September 2018 through June of 2019 and computed some averages, which are shown in the table included in your packet. And then the police department also broke out this data to look at the time thresholds when the speed table was installed. So you'll see July 21st to 22nd, the time before the speed table, the 21st to September 4th with the speed table, and the 6th to 30th after the speed table with a couple days left out as a buffer zone there. So when you look at the average 85th percentile speed from the radar feedback sign from September 18 through June 2019, that was 37.9 miles per hour. The CCRPC also collected data in August 2019 while the speed table was there, and the 85th percentile then was 41.6 miles per hour. So kind of the overall takeaway is we've made some improvements and we can see from the data there is some speed reduction. So that's good news. One thing we were talking about as a staff, the CCRPC data, you don't necessarily know the speeds being collected. Whereas the speed feedback sign, a driver's given that visual data, like this is my speed, and that can cause a different type of reaction. And you can see that here based on percentage of folks who slow down upon seeing their speed there. So you'll see the 6 weeks the speed table was in place, the 85th percentile was 34 miles per hour, which is below the speed limit of 35 miles per hour. But on all the other months as well, in February 2019, this was also 34 miles per hour, and in June of this year, it was 32 miles per hour. That was interesting, different weather conditions, different times of year, observing there. So I'll let Bruce speak to it, but looking at potentially putting in some additional speed radar feedback signs in the corridor. And when you look at the 85th percentile from that period of September 18 to June 2019, of 37.9 miles per hour, the average speed, compared to the 34 miles per hour when the speed table was there. That's a 3.9 mile per hour difference. 2.9 miles per hour when you factor in the amount of speed over the 35 mile per hour speed limit. It was a lot of numbers and a lot of data, just trying to look at this quantitatively a bit. I know there's a qualitative side to this as well. But based on this data, it's the staff's recommendation that we don't look to put a speed table back in at this point, continue to monitor it, continue to look at the data. And this will be ongoing as we work through this.
Bruce, if you don't mind, I got a question on the table. I don't know if everybody has a copy of the table, but I'm on the last 3 lines. If you look over to the right, it gives a description. The top one is speed, before speed table, then the middle one is with speed table, and after speed table.
Yep.
Then when I look at the speeds, the 85th percentile, and then the percent that slowed down, I'm seeing a what I think would have to be termed a significant difference between before and after versus with speed table. And I want to make sure I'm seeing that correctly. The sort of scientist, if you will, in me, says that looks significant.
So you're seeing the 54% versus the 52%?
Well, no, I'm saying before and after you had 54 and 52%, but then if you look at with or during the speed table, if you will, it went down to 35%. And the same thing with the 85th percentile speed. It was 41 and 40 respectively before and after the speed table, but 34 with the speed table. And I guess my point is that seems to be a significant, if I read your report, if I interpreted your report correctly, and I'm sorry, hopefully I'm not putting incorrect words in your mouth, if you will, but what I read is that, yeah, there was a difference with the speed table, but it wasn't significant. It wasn't worth it, if you will. But I look at this data, and it might suggest actually it was.
Yeah, and I was looking at the speed number, the 85th percentile speed number. So I guess it's looking at those different variables and.
Yeah. And the way I just explained it may not be the whole picture. It may not explain, yes, right here, this is what happened, but further up the road, or before they got to the speed table, there may be different factors. But when I just look at the raw data, that really kind of jumped out at me.
And I should also share for the board, on the back side of your memo is a map, and that shows where things are located. So the CCRPC speed tubes and the sign, we're not in the exact same location. They're pretty close to each other. And this is just measuring going south, so towards the village up the hill, what this data set looks at.
Which is one of the factors that could affect things too, because coming down the hill might have an impact on speed also.
Yeah, and we don't have the data at this point on that.
Other questions for Eric? So we have a couple of people I know from North Williston Road that are here, and one is a co-author of a memo that we received tonight. Either one of you care to make any comments tonight?
Yeah, thank you. Try to be brief. I appreciate you all giving me a few minutes. Again, my name is Jay Diaz. I live here in Williston. Been living here for about 5 years. 2187 North Williston. My neighbor Steve over there. So I just want to say first, thank you for keeping on this and keeping with it. I know my other neighbor, Steph Clara, would be here if she could be. Frankly, you know, we all have kids, and as many of you do, and I think it's just been hard for us to get our ducks in a row. Actually, last meeting you all had on this, I had a baby, my wife had a baby, so I was like, you know, it's been
So that's an exciting.
oh, yeah, you know, life happens, right? Anyway, so, you know, I just want to reiterate my appreciation for this study and for the previous studies, for putting in the phase 1 traffic calming measures. Those were important, and they did make a difference. The speed radar sign, most notably, as well as the rumble strip. I, you know, came to all the meetings we had with the scoping study, as did many others. And, you know, what I took away from that was a few things. You know, one is that speed is a serious, and as someone who lives there and appreciates the historic nature of the community, who appreciates the community feel that we have, even though it might seem like the houses are kind of far apart, we all actually know each other and hang out and do Halloween together and everything like that. And, you know, this has been a part of keeping that alive and making sure that it continues. So for us, I think how we want to move forward, and I've talked to many community members, is we would love to see additional traffic calming measures put in, as were suggested in the scoping study. Particularly, I think about, there's definitely consensus around the northbound side coming down the hill in the hollow towards the Winooski River is where people pick up significant speed. You know, people commute both ways on the road, and so when they come down the hill, whether it's in the morning or at night, you know, there's huge trucks coming down at over 50 miles an hour easily, just because it's easier for them not to brake, you know. But when the speed radar sign was put there, the temporary one by the police department, it was a marked difference in the speed coming down the hill. And my neighbors, I live right there where it was, and my neighbors in that area all commented that, like, this is great, we hope they'll put one there. And there's a speed limit sign right there. That would be a good placement. The second part, so I think that there are good things coming, and I'm excited to see that and grateful. The other part I really just want to emphasize is, I do think that there was some missteps in this process, and I think part of that is related to the fact that there wasn't a community process around the placement of some of the measures. You know, we know our road, you know, the traffic calming is in large part for the community, and I think if we had had a kind of community dialogue about where these things are going to go, if they weren't going to go where the scoping study said, which some of them didn't, I think we would have had, you know, some input to give you, and opinions I think might have helped the town, you know, hopefully save money, as opposed to, you know, putting things in and having to take them out. So if we do more, my opinion would be to, you know, have that community dialogue, allow people to collaborate, bring in the stakeholders so that we can have, you know, just at least an opportunity to voice our concerns or say what we think is a good idea.
Thank you very much, Jay.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I think the board is in concert with some of the things you just mentioned tonight, that we need to get as much feedback as we can from the folks who actually live there. Now, whether or not we can come up with some kind of a satisfactory solution, I don't know, but it's a tough road to deal with, and unless we could make it a lot safer, wider, and that would be something that is going to take a lot of money if we do. But I think we're all interested in making it as safe as possible so that you folks that live in North Williston are a little happier than they are right now anyway.
We're plenty happy, we love it here.
Well,
But I appreciate it, you know, I do think that, you know, and I think you saw in those meetings, I mean, there was like 100 people here from the community who really cared about this. It's, you know, quieted down a bit, but I do think that people care and would be interested in just giving their input and, you know, having a voice in the process.
Rick, if I could add a comment. First of all, I thank you for your comments. The select board, I forget when it was, fairly recently adopted a policy on traffic calming, and one key component of that was, well, a couple key components. One is to kind of take it step at a time, measure the results as you go, so you only do what is absolutely necessary. The second component was community involvement, because that is an important part. We found, well, from experience, if nothing else, if you don't get community buy-in, you're going to get lots of unhappy people. And so that's a key component of the policy the select board has adopted. And so staff is charged with making sure that that happens moving forward.
Yeah, and I want to say it was your office that let me know about this meeting, so I'm grateful for that and appreciative.
Steve, anything to say?
Well, thank you for the swift action you took on taking the speed table out. It's made a marked difference in our life, just in the noise and especially with the traffic. You know, we get a lot of different traffic. We have farm traffic, you know, the Whitcomb farm generates a lot of truck traffic by our house. But just in general, I still see people, you know, especially in small sports cars, speeding on that road. I don't know how you stop that mentality, but, you know, sometimes I wish, even if there was just a better muffler law in the state, you know, it would make a big difference. But I encourage you to sort of back what Jay's letter said, and, you know, I appreciate much more community involvement from our part, interacting with you on the next steps. So, thank you.
Thanks. Comments?
One thing is, and if we erred on the side of community involvement, you know, absolutely, you know, we need to do that, we should do that, we want to do that. Just 2 points about this whole thing is, the trouble with some of the traffic calming measures is we can get together beforehand and discuss them, great, but we really aren't going to know the impacts till they're in place. And I'm going to use as the example the rumble strips. I mean, there was no way for us to know, anybody to really know what the noise impact of those were until they were in place. And yeah, do we wish we didn't do it as much as we did? Probably. But I mean, that's part of the process. You know, you can't help that. We can't always get things perfect right up front. And in terms of the speed table, I actually think the town did a pretty good job. That was a pretty smart move to get a temporary speed table. Yes, we put it in place, and there were those that didn't feel it worked, and we chose to move it, but that's the beauty of it. It's temporary. And I'll make my point again. If you want to know a place to put it, I've got a place that I would be happy if you set it up and see how it worked on my road. Thank you.
Other comments? If not, then I think we'll be anxious to see what develops on the further actions perhaps on North Williston Road, so it'll be a while.
We'll put it on the list of things to take up in, I don't know how long, less than a year, I guess. I don't know exactly when we'll put it on, but.
We'll be back discussing it for sure, so thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So we're down to the last thing. We've had other business, but this is your last shot at other business for tonight. If not, going once, going twice, we're adjourned.
I thought we were going to take a 10-minute recess so we could think of additional